I've been working in the field of suicide and suicide prevention for about 12 years. And I started doing this when really, I lost my brother to suicide when I was 13 and he was 15. He's been gone almost 20 years. It's something that you never quite ever really get over, but you learn how to live and move through your time. So I wanted to start working with people who were experiencing suicidal ideation, people who felt like they didn't have a whole lot to live for. And when I was an undergrad, my mentor said, if you want to work with a group of people who don't feel like they have anything, there's a juvenile sex offender treatment program. And these are kids aged 12 to 17 who were convicted of contact sexual abuse, and they felt like they had pretty much no reason to live. The identity of a sex offender put on someone as young as 12 years old, and him being told that that's all he is, that's all he's ever going to be, has a pretty dramatic way of changing the course of somebody's life, and not in a good way. And so with these experiences in mind, after I met my husband, I started doing a lot of suicide prevention work focused on the registry, having seen the impact. And I will tell you, I remember the name of every single young man who was under my care for those 2.5 years. I remember their stories, and I carry their scars with me in hopes that we can use it for some good and help somebody else. So this is one of my favorite quotes that I think is going to define a lot of what we're talking about today, but it says, the scars that you share become lighthouses for people who are headed for the same rocks that you have hit yourself. And so we're going to do a lot about storytelling over the time that I'm here, and which I'm sure you all have heard a lot about. I know my husband spoke on it and Chance spoke on it, but the importance of owning your identity and realizing that no matter what, everybody is a human being with inherent dignity and worth, and everybody deserves to be alive and to be happy. So whenever we think about suicide prevention, most of the time we hear about it in the media whenever we have a celebrity who dies by suicide. And these are 3 headlines these are all within the past year. I think that after Anthony Bourdain died is when a couple of these articles came out. So suicide rates rise sharply across the United States. A new report shows, that's from the BBC in 2018. Dramatic rise in suicides is more than a mental health issue, says the CDC. Thankfully, we've, as researchers, known that for a little while. There's a lot more that goes into it than feelings of depression. So we're thinking, is suicide a public health issue that we're not addressing? Is it more than just issues happening with individuals? And we say absolutely. Because we're going to talk for a minute just about suicide statistics in general. So the most recent data we have is from 2017. We had 47,000 people die by suicide in the United States, and that's about 1 every 11 minutes, if you think about it. And that is up pretty dramatically. We're seeing a 30% increase. So we're looking at the late 90s, we saw about 1 person every 17 to 19 minutes. We saw it decreasing, but over the past 18 years, we have seen a dramatic upshoot in relation to population of people who are choosing to end their lives. So if we're looking at leading cause of death, it is the 10th leading cause of death for adults in the United States, and below that, 2 statistics that are really troubling to me. The second leading cause of death for age 15 to 24, just under car accidents, and for the age 9 to 14, the first leading cause of death. Suicide has taken the lead of the leading cause of death for that age group for the first time in known history. And so we're thinking, why is the United States seeing such dramatically increasing rates? Well, other nations saw equally declining rates. You look at Sweden, you look at Denmark, Germany, Mexico, Canada. Their rates over time have been declining for their population. The United States is the only developed country in the world that is seeing an increase in suicide rate every year. And we're trying to figure that out. There's a lot of different factors that we are thinking about, and this is really the first time we are starting to look at the role of the criminal legal system in losing people that we have to suicide. So this is general, just adults in the United States. We are going to look at now people who have justice involvement in the United States. So there was a longitudinal study taken over 20 years where a group of researchers followed about 11,000 people who were formerly incarcerated over 20 years. And they said, how many of these people die by suicide? We're seeing about 23% of the known people who have died was from suicide, which is the highest number. After that came drug addiction, drug abuse, overdosing, alcohol, and then natural causes. But suicide, over the people who have died over that time, almost a quarter, almost 1 out of every 4 of the people who were dead, they ended their lives. Research shows that men who are justice involved, so either you are arrested and you are incarcerated or you go through probation, but men who have some type of a charge on their record are 8 times more likely to end their life than just a regular man in the population. And the other statistic I saw recently that was not too surprising was about 1 out of every 3 of those deaths occur within 4 weeks of release. Within 4 weeks of them getting out of release. Because you're seeing such difficulty finding employment, finding a place to live, being able to live with family, having family turn their back on you. There's so many different reasons, but once you leave prison, we are seeing that life is a lot harder to adjust to. And one of the things I saw in the study was the role of technology, which I'll talk about for a second. But for example, a man who was incarcerated for 20 years comes out today, he doesn't know what an iPhone is. He has not used an iPhone, does not know a whole lot about social media, and that's how we connect as people nowadays. So we're seeing that furthering the divide between people and their loved ones once they get out. So now we're going to talk about the registry. There's very limited data. There have only been about 4 studies that I know of that really focus on the registry, but that's not a typo. It says adult men who are on sex crime registries, public registries, are 183 times more likely to die by suicide than a man in the general population, 183 times. This is we were looking at a sample size. The study had a sample size in the United States of just under 2,200 men on the registry tracked for 10 years. We saw a rate of 183 times. And juveniles, we do know that juveniles make up about 25% of registries in the United States, somebody who's under the age of 18. And since juveniles, as we discussed earlier, already have that high rate, like we're looking at 9 to 14, suicide being the leading cause of death in that age group, we're seeing a 24 times more likely a juvenile to die if it's someone who's a juvenile and who's on the registry. And another thing, Mississippi and Alabama, I saw a suicide attempt can violate probation or parole in some ways. If you try to attempt when you're awaiting parole, they can remove your parole from you. If you attempt while you're on probation in those states, they can lock you up and say you are a danger, and they can hold you in commitment for 48, 72 hours, and then hold you indefinitely longer based on your mental health. And it can affect your compliance, because if you're not presenting in a way that is what we call mentally normative, if you seem like you're depressed, if you seem like you're sad, and you report it, then they can use that as a way just to take somebody in and just to put them behind bars. And most of the time that doesn't result in another conviction, but we are seeing that, which was really astounding to me. I could not believe that you could bring somebody into removing your probation, it's ridiculous, absolutely. So now that we got those out of the way, we're going to talk just for a minute about how suicide happens. So this is, it's going to be hard to read, but I'm going to go over it. But a lot of people ask, why do some people with the same, if you take 2 people with the same background, with the same history of mental health issues, with the same struggles, and another person, why does this person choose to end their life and this person does not? So I'm going to go over this. The first thing we're going to look at is thwarted belongingness. And I want you guys to look at this and think about the registry specifically when I talk about these things. Thwarted belongingness is that feeling of I am alone and I don't belong anywhere. And if we're looking at the registry and how that impacts this, if you're thinking about the fact that your name is on a website with your address, with your identifiers, with the car that you drive, and that fear of walking out into public and being recognized by somebody based on a crime that you committed, that stigma that goes with it, not being able to find a house, not being able to find a job, not being able to live with family because they live too close to a daycare or to a school. Of course, people who are registrants feel like I am alone and I don't belong anywhere. It's completely understandable. And the registry, especially sworn in laws, it removes that sense of agency. When we're talking about agency, we say, I am the master of my own destiny. I am the master of my own life. But if you cannot do interstate travel, if you cannot decide where you can take your kids to school, if you cannot even take them to school to begin with, that feeling of agency almost no longer exists, because it's saying this registry scheme is the master of my fate. I am not the master of my fate. Part 2 we call perceived burdensomeness. I am a burden to the people who love me. And if you have that issue of not being able to find a job, relying on your partner to pay the bills because you can't, if you're relying on your partner to raise the children whenever you're not able to be in close proximity with them anymore, and even healthcare restrictions. I know, my husband, when he was going through his rounds of depression, he went to a couple of places that wouldn't take him because he was on the registry, even though he wanted to end his life. They just looked at that registry component and said, that's what defines you. Even though you're depressed, sorry, we can't help you because you're on the registry. So feeling like you are a burden to the people that you love the most, and that the only good thing you can do is end your life. That's what we call perceived burdensomeness, to no longer put that pain on the people that you love. And the registry, you see this so much. Then the last thing is what we call the capability for suicide, and that is I'm no longer afraid to die. So when we talk about risk-taking behaviors, that can be anything from speeding to drug use to getting lots of piercings and tattoos, things, if you think about, that lower that distance between you and your death. Because if I were to fill up a tub of water right here and I were to get in and put my head in it, I would not even think I have to breathe. My body would just jump up like that, because we have this need to live. It's wired into every bit of our cells that need to self-sustain and to self-persevere. So over time, little things that lower that distance, that make it to where you will override that instinct that you have to naturally be alive. And whenever we look at people who are registered, we do look at, I never judge anybody for abusing alcohol or for abusing drugs whenever they're in this position, because you want to numb how it feels to feel that way. And so things like that will lower that inhibition. So I'm going to bring the circle back up here. And I'm not going to get up and move, but I'm going to point to those two at the top. Thwarted belongingness, I am alone. Perceived burdensomeness, I am a burden. When those two circles meet together, that's what we have. We have suicidal ideation. You feel like I am useless. I don't need to be here anymore. But attempts come from when you add that third capability in there, that capability to die. And once you hit that part, it can become more difficult to work with somebody and to save that life. I'm here in multiple roles. I'm here having, I'm a registry wife. I'm married to my husband. I live this life every day, and I'm here as a researcher. So when I was invited to speak, I want to bring these two worlds together. Because as a researcher, being a mental health professional, I see that my work does not care about the registry. And that might not surprise any of you. A lot of people who are justice involved, you might go to social workers or to therapists or to doctors and think they don't really care about me because of this happening to me. And so one of the big problems that we have in suicide prevention efforts in general is we don't have a whole lot of funding. Even in the role of mental health and psychiatry and psychology, suicide prevention is not given a whole lot of money. We're given maybe 1.5% of all funds for public health over a course of time. So we have hotlines, we have limited training that we do for therapists and providers, but in general, we don't have a lot to work with. You have a lot of mental health care providers who can say, I don't take insurance. If I were to go break my arm, I could not go to a doctor who says, I don't take insurance. You really only see that in the field of mental health. And then you also have a lot of people who live in rural areas where the number of providers per capita is really low. So it could take 60, 80 miles to get somewhere that will see you. And then once you get there, they might not even take your insurance. And if you are already underemployed, it can be very difficult to pay for the help. And then there's the stigma. You see so many people who, even though they're helping professionals, once they hear the term sex offender, they look at you some kind of way. And I'm sure a lot of you know what I mean whenever I say that. So if you know that that's going to be the response that you get when you go for help, you're not going to go for help and tell people that you feel like you don't want to be around anymore, if you feel like you don't matter to begin with.
Well, you get labeled as a codependent.
Yeah, you see that? You see that, absolutely. So I love suicide prevention. I've been doing this for almost 13 years. And the zero suicide movement, I think, is amazing. It is the movement to say no more lives should be lost from suicide. No more. We're going to lower the rate to zero. And we talk about everyone has dignity and worth as a human being. Everybody has meaning. Everybody's wonderful. Everybody's amazing. But that's all well and good, but that's not going to really take care of the problem. Like, I can use sunshine and happiness and rainbows all day. I can walk up to each and every person and say, your life matters, please. Please don't end your life matters. But whenever I leave the room and you still don't have a job, and you still have the trauma that comes with the registry, that feeling of shame of being told that these things happen to you because you deserve it, because you're a monster, because that's who you are as a human being, then no amount of sunshine and light I can say to you is going to take away that feeling that you don't belong, that you don't need to be here anymore. So how can we actually start saving lives whenever we have people with complicated histories, but we still think everybody deserves basic decency and worth? Yes.
Isn't the military putting any money into this?
Military focuses on veteran suicide, but not really general at all. But they are starting to put more money into armed services and veterans, but specifically for those groups. But it's important because those groups have really high rates too. Yes.
You know, we just had it in San Francisco, Walk for Suicide.
Yes.
And that was like the most beautiful commercial I did, and I heard it last year, and it's very touching that yes, someone's done it by trying to.
Yeah.
Is that going on around the country? Is that just
Yes,
something-
we do have them sponsored in several cities around the country, and they tend to go toward, foundations like American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or, I'm a member of the American Association of Suicidology, or they go for hotlines, but then we don't really have any control over where that money goes from there. It's usually people ahead who are trying to put it other places. So I'm talking about suicide. So the name of my talk, why suicide prevention needs to include registrants. So what do we do now? I've depressed all of you with the facts and with the statistics. So what's the point? So I have pretty much only one point to make, and it's a big one. I just want you all to look at it for a second. And I know that I'm looking around the room, and there's a good mix of people. I see people who are directly impacted. I see people who are legal scholars. I see people who are a mix of the two. But at the end of the day, people on sex offense registries are people, and people deserve to be alive. Every person deserves to be alive. That's what I am wanting to do. And so I'm here, and my hope is I'm working on a project right now where I'm going to be interviewing registrants and registrant families. And I'm going to be taking my research to the American Association of Suicidology, hopefully next year, and saying, we need to do something about this. People are dying. Thank you. We have upwards of 1 million people, and if you think about that, that's just a million people, but then they are families. They have children, they have parents, they have neighbors. So the number of people who are impacted, it's way bigger than it ever should have ever been, but also it's way too big to ignore. People are dying. We are losing good people, and we are letting these lives be cut off before we can provide an answer and before these lives can prove everyone wrong. And I'm stubborn, I'm feisty, I'm that person where I say I fight to prove people wrong. I don't let things go, and this is something I don't plan on letting go. We want to bring the fight to the battle of the people with the money and the people with the resources and the people who are writing the policy that helps people get the mental health care that they need. And I'm saying we're forgetting about a huge, huge population of people who need it. So there's 2 people on this slide. On the left, if you guys heard my husband talk, that's Ryan Losgarn. Guy on the right is one of my best friends. That was Matt Vanderpool. These 2 people very similar in a lot of ways. Similar in ways I didn't really find out until recently. I'd known Matt for a very, very, very long time, about 14 years. And he was running for office in Kentucky. And as a gay man running for office in Kentucky, it's a big deal, but he won his primary. He was running for state representative, he won his primary. And he lost in the general, and then 16-year-old boy that he had been sending pictures to came to him and said, "I'm going to turn you in." And Matt died later that night. And he's been gone now about 8 years. It'll be 8 years next month. And so I had been missing Matt every day for the past several years, but it wasn't until I was working on this presentation and I was talking to one of our mutual friends, and she said, "I was going to take this to my grave." He told me what had happened, but I didn't want anyone to think less of him. I didn't want anyone to think he was a pervert or that he was a child molester or anything like that. I just wanted everyone to mourn him for the life that he had and for the person he was. And that same respect should be afforded to anybody who passes on, just talking about the person who they were. And Ryan, who we never got to meet, had that fall from grace. He worked in politics, and he saw what happened, probably what Matt would have saw happened if the things he did were made public. And two people who probably would have gotten along if they had known each other, probably would have liked each other a whole lot, and two lives who are gone because of stigma, because of wanting to rather be dead than be seen as a sex offender. And if that's the way we talk about people on the registry, then that's a really big problem. If you would rather be dead than be that, and this is something that our government is telling us is the right thing to do and is going to keep us safe, there's a major problem here. People are dying. So we need to give registrants reasons to stay. So how do we do that? I say, going to my suicidology people, saying stop suicide's not enough. Posting a hotline number is not enough. Posting a website or a chat line or coping skills to get you through the night, it's all wonderful. It's all good. It's all important, but it's not enough. Because these problems that registrants and their families face are systemic. It's not a design flaw. The system was designed to keep these people down. The system was designed to keep you out of sight and to make you live in the shame and to live in the guilt. And then by saying, okay, well, you feel guilty, you deserve it, the system's built that way. We cannot do that anymore. We need to come up with actual legitimate resources. And the first thing I can really do to do that is to bring a data set to them and say, these are people, each one of these points represents a person. This is what somebody is going through, and hopefully trying to push it through just by the sheer numbers. There's such a huge conflict between the registration schemes and the existing agency, like I was talking about before. You cannot say your lives matter and they're important, but the government controls every move you and your family make. It's not going to work. I don't know if anyone in here is familiar with labeling theory. Oh, I know you are.
Familiar.
Labeling theory.
You hear it every day.
This kind of ties into this, but that feeling of using the term sex offender by saying that this is what somebody is, not what they've done, but that is saying that is what you are. And then if you hear that every day, day in and day out, if you hear that when your boss fires you from looking you up and finding you on the registry, when you hear that from when a partner walks out on you when you get arrested, when you hear that from when your kids don't talk to you anymore out of the shame, then that becomes who you are. I am a sex offender. You think, I am a pervert. I am a monster. And that type of guided thinking is not going to keep people alive. And shame versus guilt, they seem like the same thing. Shame and guilt are incredibly different. If you think about guilt, guilt is I'm sorry for what I did. Shame is I'm sorry for who I am. And every person I've met through doing this work just lives with that inherent shame, not the guilt. The guilt's fine. The guilt's normative. If you did something you shouldn't have done, it's okay to feel guilty about that. It's not okay to feel shame over you thinking that's who you are as a human being. Every person that I'm seeing sitting here, we've all probably done unspeakable things. I'm not registered. I've done unspeakable. We have all done something, but I will not let that define me as who I am and let that decide the measure and the weight that my life has. And I don't want anyone in here to do that either. You have worth as a human being. You have just inherent goodness as a person breathing on this planet, and the registry does not define you. It does not define you. That is not who you are. That's not family members. That is not who you are. So what do we do to help them stay? At the bottom, I have abolished public registries because, of course, if we could do that, then everything would be neat. But some smaller things we could probably do, we need to have actual treatment for people that is actually confidential. I know if it's court mandated treatment for some, sometimes those therapist notes can be used in court against you, and it's really hard to form a relationship with a provider when your deepest, darkest secrets are going to be read in front of a judge and jury. So we need to make sure that if we are looking at civil commitment programs, if we are looking at mandatory sex offender treatment programs, that those places can actually be sacred, confidential spaces. Because no one is going to want to say everything that's on their heart if they know that it's going to come back to their PO. It just makes sense. That's one small thing that we can do, is to try to push for confidentiality, because everybody else is afforded that confidentiality with a treatment provider. For some reason, if it's provided through the correctional system, maybe for people when they're at their most vulnerable and who might not have been able to get it otherwise, by coming in and completely just warping that relationship, that sacred thing of that help that you could be getting, by warping that with all of these registration, all these requirements, is ridiculous. We obviously need to increase support for employment and for housing, because you feel a lot better whenever you have a house that you can call your own. It makes you feel like more of a solid person. It makes you feel better whenever you have money to pay for your bills and to pay for your food and do all that. That does a lot for somebody's mental health. It's not a fix-all. You wouldn't have rich people dying by suicide if money could fix everything, but money can sure fix a whole lot when you don't have any. It can fix a whole lot of problems. And reframing, this is a bigger one. This is a harder sell. It's my favorite, but it's a harder sell, and I'll tell you about it. We're talking about reframing sexual abuse and sexual violence as this is what monsters do, into imperfect people who've done imperfect things. Because we know what the statistics are. We know that it's usually not the stranger in the bushes who's coming and kidnapping the children. We know it's everyday people, and people make mistakes. And so by getting out of that, we might have better treatment of people if we're not thinking about it as the monster. And it also does a lot more for the inherent self-esteem and the value of the worth of your soul. So as a researcher, I told you what my scheme is. A lot of them don't know it yet. Some of my researcher friends know what I'm doing, and they're like, what are you doing? But I need stories. I need as many people as I can get to talk to me once we go through the IRB approval and do all of that stuff. As many people to talk to me and tell me, how has the registry affected your mental health? Everything from residency restrictions to just the inherent stigma, to if you went to a medical provider who did not provide for you. If you were, like my husband, not given services because of your status on the registry. Every single thing, because I need to take a body of research to these people who are doing this super important work and say you're leaving out a ton of people that need it, probably more than other populations do. I need all of you to know that you're not alone, and every person I've talked to so far, especially in the realms of child pornography and with minors, thoughts of suicide and wanting to not be here anymore, near 100%. And it makes sense given the way that the system is designed to kind of hold you down that way. And we need to be held accountable. Social workers, therapists, nurses, researchers, all of us. We seek to do the work because it's important to us, but the people we are working on behalf of need to hold us accountable. If there are people struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts and all of these things, and the researchers and the healthcare providers are not doing enough to help you, do what you can do. Be as loud as you can until you get your needs met, because you deserve to have your needs met, and we need to be held accountable for the actions that we have done by not providing these services. So I am just about done. I told you I'd flash up a couple little things here because I know this is not fun to talk about, but these are wonderful resources. I do research through the American Association of Suicidology, and their website's up on the top. They don't provide direct resources. It's mostly just a place to look at research. The 273 Talk hotline is probably the most popular one. I worked for Suicide Hotline. I did that for about 2.5 years. And another thing that my faculty mentor and I have talked about is providing training to hotline workers whenever someone calls in who's justice involved. Because a lot of times if you call the hotline and you say, well, I'm on the sex offender registry, they're not going to hang up on you, but you can tell that they're not going to be as open as they might have been otherwise. But providing training, because those are the first responders when it comes to suicidal ideation, and to be turned away or to feel judged the first time you're trying to seek help will keep a lot of people from calling back, and we don't want that. And then AFSP also provides a lot of good stuff. And I have my contact information up here. If you are interested in contacting me about this project, if you are a registrant or a family member of a registrant, let me know. And then once we have everything finalized, IRB approval, we will get that going. But just let me know if you are interested. And then there's going to be some eligibility required, there's going to be a survey that you'll have to take before the official study starts, but that way it gives me an email address or point of contact to send it out to. And feel free to share. And as far as publication goes, obviously I will not list your name or anything like that. All of that will be listed in the study once the study is finished and it does go out. But this is important work. I'm just one person. If you can help me, that'd be neat. I'd be really excited. Yes?
I think one of the easiest places to go was what you're trying to accomplish is just go to any of the local rural offices.
Mm-hmm.
Each one, there's so many of them, especially within a mile of here.
Yeah.
There's several. And all you really have to do is post one on the board.
Yeah.
And it's with a bunch of other stuff. But those people, when they first get out and they're on parole, that's when I felt the worst, is when at the end of the day, when it's starting there, you gotta go get in line and go into a homeless shelter.
Right.
And then Christmas time comes around, there's that lack of family thing. But I think that's where it's easiest, is right off the bat.
Yeah,
And you can get all
absolutely.
the stories you want to, and for Alex, his support groups, those people will be willing to share their stories with you. There's a lot of people that are willing to help you.
It needs to be done. I've been, like I said, I started working with, juveniles convicted of sex crimes. This was 2012 to 2014 I did that work. So I started about 7 years ago. And I told my faculty advisor, her name's Julie Serrell. I know a couple of you follow her on Twitter, but she's the former president of the American Association of Suicidology. And she's been saying for a while, yes, we see these issues. We know these issues, but it was not politically convenient to do anything about it. And I said, when is keeping people alive? When are we getting rid of that for political convenience? We are here to save lives. No matter how popular that is, we want to keep people alive. So I refuse to listen to that it's not smart to do this work, because if there are people dying, then that means that this is incredibly important work. That means we need to work harder to get it done instead of just waiting for someone who likes it.
Yeah,
Yes?
it's on the website too.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
I just hear so many stories, including my own family's, the churches turning registrants away. And,
Yeah.
I seem to have a good experience with his pastor in church, but I know a lot of Catholic churches turn me away because they have schools adjacent to the
Right.
church.
Right.
Nothing worse than being turned away from the church.
Absolutely. When you're looking for the light of God, to not even be allowed to walk through the doors, there's nothing more dehumanizing than that.
And the other thing I thought strange bedfalls, but I heard a psychologist who has written books on helping policemen and their families because they have a high rate of
They
suicide.
do. They do.
And then they're constantly demeaned in the newspaper on
Sure.
a daily basis, which would kind of get to your self-esteem.
Sure. Yeah, I think that I wish I had more. I thought about putting a couple puppy pictures in here to spread them out, or a couple of memes, because I know I just dumped on you for an hour. Look how depressing all of this is. But if there wasn't hope, I wouldn't be here to tell you that there is hope. I think that sometimes even a little bit of hope can go a whole long way, and I'm hoping that I can provide that here for you. That there are people in the mental health world who care, who see, and who are trying to work on this. And I just want everyone in here alive long enough to see this come to fruition. I want everyone to be around to see us make some moves, make some changes.
It's the plant.
Well, yeah. No, I just, it just occurred to me that, there's so many kind of Kafka-esque aspects to this intersection of people who are justice involved and then mental health treatment, and I totally forgot until you reminded me about the part of my experience where I was in law school. It's I wanted to die, and I went to go and get therapy because I was okay, I don't want to die, I want to get help. And they said, oh, well, you're on the registry, but we can't do anything for you.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm fucking suicidal, and you're not you're not giving me any treatment. And I had to jump through hoops, but eventually I was able to get into treatment. But I don't know, it just occurred to me just sitting here, that if I hadn't done all that, then I hadn't been able to finally get that help and get that treatment and survive.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, at least my experience is when I've been at that point, it's really something inside my head that's trying to kill me.
Yeah.
And I need to survive it.
Yeah.
Well, then we wouldn't have happened, right? And I wouldn't have been doing this work. And it wouldn't have like found, I guess, what I consider to be my calling.
Yeah.
And so I just echo the message that you're spreading, that, you know, people need to stay, even
Yeah.
through these difficulties.
Yes.
How much have you been looking into maybe even more direct or acute triggers, not just being on the registry or things you're going through generally in life?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll have, a few good days where, it doesn't affect my everyday life.
Sure.
So maybe I go a couple days that I don't even
Sure.
remember, or I don't think about it. And then you see a story on Twitter
Yeah.
or on Facebook about one person who gets arrested
Right.
for, like when the guy from Glee, got
Yeah.
arrested.
Mark Salling. Yeah.
And, even before he committed suicide, killed or died by suicide,
Thank you.
even before that, even just his arrest, every single comment on every single post, on every single article is die by the gun,
Yeah.
die, kill
Yeah.
yourself, die.
Yeah.
Here's a tip, don't read.
No, we did
Don't,
not.
never.
The bottom half of the internet does not exist.
Yeah, never
No.
read the comments.
No.
I know that coming from a spouse, I remember the day that I got the sucker punch. And turning around and finding out that there was no one there to support you. If you decided to leave them, everyone's there to support you and gather around you. But the day you decide, no, I'm going to stay, everyone scatters. And you are dealing with that self-destructive bomb, and you're trying to defuse it and trying to keep your family together, and you've got nothing. And
Yeah.
trying to get that help from mental health, and then they're turning around telling you, well, you're part of the problem,
Mhm.
you're just enabling them, and you're codependent. And that also plays into a lot of the mental health. And I think about every day that the only reason that I stayed is because I was not about to take another parent from my children. And if I did not have my children, I would not be here today.
To add on to that, I think that deciding to live, even just get through the night, whenever the world and society is telling you that your life does not matter and that you should kill yourself, I think living is, forgive my language, one of the most badass things that you can do to come out of it and to continue on. Like, it's a riot act. It's a riot act because you're saying, you're completely defying everyone who's telling you your life doesn't matter. And that based on what you did, you don't deserve to be here. By just getting through the night, it's so powerful, but you're defying the entire world. You're making big moves just by getting through the night and then getting through the next day and the next night, just over and over and over again. Just tiny rebellious acts that way are so brave. They're so incredibly brave. Yes?
Last year at a conference here,
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about my feelings of committing suicide.
Yeah.
I was told that instead of using the word suicide, to use the words end my life.
Okay.
Is there a difference, or do you have any opinion on that?
I believe in using the word suicide. I believe in calling it what it is. When I did hotline work, we would have people say, I don't want to be here anymore, or I just don't want to do it, but wouldn't name it. But by naming it, we would say, are you thinking of suicide? By putting the word to it, it's something that they might be afraid of saying themselves. And you build your rapport with that person. You build that connection with them by naming it. And we don't want to beat around the bush, because suicide is so incredibly serious that we want to get to the root of what's actually going on. So I prefer to use it, but I'm not going to tell somebody else what words to put with how they feel. So if people prefer using "in my life" or something like that, that's totally fine, because it means the same thing. It's just in my experience and in my work, I will use the word.
I think end my life is a little more subtle, and suicide is, and I'm afraid, I've been, I'm not arrested, but I've been taken, I told my psychologist
Yeah.
that I was thinking of committing suicide, and called me, and I was outside, driving to where I was gonna commit suicide, and
Mhm.
she called me in, and then, I was talking with her for a while, and then the police came and took me
Yeah.
to USC Hospital,
Mhm.
and where I stayed for 3 nights, and then they put me in another facility, and I stayed there for about a week and a half.
Yeah.
And I never want to go through that again.
There's a lot of research that shows that a lot of those things are not always the most helpful for people who are going through, which is a different talk for a different time at a different conference, but yeah, those things make you feel really bad.
You know, I think it's also helpful, and we should probably do it here at some point. There's a lot of success stories, and
Yeah.
they're not all great. They're not like guys, they're not like chances, they're not like the people that spoke. They're small stories.
And those are so important.
They're the most
Yeah,
important because
absolutely.
not all of us are going to get to be Guy or Chance, or even like I'm very, very blessed to
Sure.
have overridden a lot of what I went through. But
No, I
somewhere,
feel you.
those stories need to be told
Yes.
to the people that are still struggling.
I agree. I think we need more directly impacted stories at events like this.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the huge success stories, which those are wonderful, obviously, but we need to hear from people who are, because we're doing this work for people who are directly impacted. And we cannot leave out those voices, so that would be super.
It was kind of a homecoming today for some of the people. Deborah's never been here before, but, you know, some of the people are thanking me, and other ones I forgot I had some sort of small impact on. You know, something may have happened 3 years ago, and they've come a long ways.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize sometimes just a kind word,
Yeah,
sometimes you can inspire somebody with a hug, sometimes,
yeah.
I mean, just anything to validate them as human beings and to encourage them, listen, if you got to here, you're halfway home, or something. But we do need that.
I agree. Absolutely. Adele.
Two quick things. I
Yes.
wanted to give a plug towards this end for a magazine that's published by Illinois Voices for Reform. Some people who are affiliated with Illinois Voices for Reform. It's called Lifetimes, and it's positive stories of people having happy, productive lives while on the right street.
Oh, wow.
Finding joy, doing things they love, hobbies, connecting with family, things like that. So that is a really interesting magazine, and it's full of wonderful stories that I encourage everybody to.
What is it?
It's called Lifetimes.
They have a booth, I think, it might still be upstairs, I don't know if they've taken it down, but they did have a couple little flyers that you could pick up and find out more about it.
So that's
Um,
a really beautiful thing. And I was hoping to ask a question about
Yes.
it when you said it really resonated with me, which was that it greatly impacts and destroys the potential for productive therapy integration. Your treatment provider can be used to punish you
Yes.
or potentially take you back to prison.
Yes.
And that really struck me because that comes up so often in work I try to do to try to reform some aspects of parole.
Mhm.
Is that the therapist's opinion will determine whether you can see your child. The therapist's opinion will determine whether you can have internet access.
Mhm.
All of these aspects of your life can be very badly harmed by what you say or don't say to the therapist. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how the use of mandatory treatment could be reformed and improved.
I think even in mandatory treatment, I believe in full confidentiality. Even if somebody does disclose something in therapy, that if they disclose other crimes or things like that, I mean, they're like, in my role as a mandatory reporter, I have certain people, certain things that they say to me, I do have to report. And I think that even with mandatory treatment, especially in the realms of civil commitment, I think that those same boundaries should be upheld. If you say you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt somebody else, and there's an identifiable victim, if I say I'm going to go murder Guy Hamilton Smith, there's a duty to warn, then I'd have to go call him. Like, I've never said that before. But I think but to answer your question, I think that mandatory treatment should have those same guidelines too. That they should not be able to break out of the realm of confidentiality unless it is to save specifically one person. So that's where my reform would go. And I think that there's a lot of other people. The American Psychological Association also completely agrees with the idea of getting rid of those issues where they tell. Because you're not going to get any help from that. You're going to go in, say exactly what they want to hear, so you don't get anything else happening to you, and you're going to leave still wanting to die. It doesn't help anybody. Yes?
Is there any statistics gathered on attempted suicides? And is there any truth that what I've heard that if you're attempting suicide, you really don't want to take your life, you just want attention?
To say that, I might say yes, that person might need attention, but for me, I say they need it for a reason. And I will provide that to them. That's what they need. Any type of, we have a difference between, we call it NSSI, that's non-suicidal self-injury. That's like cutting, for example. It's the intent to harm without the intent to take your life. But anything else, even if you're taking 2 pills, 2 Tylenol that you know isn't going to kill you, if you're doing that with the intent to die, that needs to be. And if what they need is for someone to focus on them, I will provide that focus. So to me, they're all serious. Even what we call non-suicidal self-injury can accidentally lead to death, even if they didn't mean it. So anything that's causing somebody to make even the tiniest attempt on their life is something to take seriously. Because remember when I had that diagram pulled up and it had the 3 circles, the one on the bottom? Those non-suicidal self-injuries, or those little attempts, over time become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger attempts. So I'd rather deal with it when it's 1 Tylenol versus 20 down the road and we can't get them back anymore. I want them to know that they matter to me at step 1, even if it's small.